Lady Catherine Pemberton stood at the tall windows of Rosewood Manor, watching the morning mist roll across the manicured gardens. As the head of household staff for the fictional royal family of Aldoria, she carried herself with the dignity befitting her position. The manor had been home to the Duke and Duchess of Westmere for over a decade, and their young daughter, Princess Isabella, had grown up within these walls under Catherine's watchful eye. The morning routine at Rosewood Manor was as precise as clockwork. Catherine had overseen countless mornings just like this one, ensuring that every detail of the royal family's daily life proceeded without incident. The staff moved through their duties with practiced efficiency, from the groundskeepers tending to the rose gardens, to the kitchen staff preparing the morning meal. Princess Isabella, now 8 years old, was known throughout the manor for her curious nature and boundless energy. She had a particular fondness for the library's ancient books, and spent hours listening to stories read by her devoted nanny, Mrs. Tewson, Eleanor Hartwell. Eleanor had been with the family since Isabella's birth, becoming not just a caretaker but a trusted member of the household. On this particular morning, however, something felt different. Catherine noticed it first in the way Eleanor moved through the corridors. There was a nervousness in her step that hadn't been there before. The nanny's usual warm demeanor seemed strained, and she avoided making eye contact with the other staff members during their morning briefing. Catherine had built her reputation on attention to detail and her ability to sense when something was amiss. Years of service had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now, those instincts were telling her that all was not well within the walls of Rosewood Manor. She made a mental note to observe Eleanor more closely in the coming days. The Duchess of Westmere, Lady Margaret, had always been particular about Isabella's care. Every aspect of the young princess's life was carefully monitored, from her education, to her meals, to her bedtime routine. Margaret insisted on being informed of any changes, no matter how small, and she had developed a close working relationship with Catherine to ensure everything ran smoothly. As the morning progressed, Catherine went about her usual duties of coordinating with the various department heads. She met with the head cook to discuss the day's menu, reviewed the week's schedule with the groundskeeper, and checked on the housekeeping staff as they prepared the family's private quarters. Despite the routine nature of these tasks, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was troubling Eleanor. During the mid-morning break, Catherine decided to visit the nursery wing where Eleanor spent most of her time with Princess Isabella. She found the nanny in the small kitchen adjacent to Isabella's playroom, preparing the child's mid-morning snack. Eleanor was carefully measuring milk into a crystal glass, her hands trembling slightly as she worked. Catherine approached quietly, not wanting to startle the woman. "Good morning, Eleanor. How is our young princess today?" Eleanor jumped slightly at the sound of Catherine's voice, nearly dropping the glass she was holding. "Oh, Lady Catherine, you startled me." "Isabella is doing well, thank you. She's in the garden with her tutor, working on her botanical studies." Catherine noticed that Eleanor's response seemed rehearsed, lacking the natural warmth that usually characterized her interactions with the staff. The nanny's eyes darted away from Catherine's gaze, focusing instead on the task at hand. She reached into a small cloth pouch and withdrew what appeared to be a white powder, which she began to dissolve in the milk. "What are you adding to Isabella's milk?" Catherine asked, her tone carefully neutral despite the alarm bells ringing in her mind. Eleanor's face flushed crimson. "Oh, it's just, the Duchess requested that Isabella receive additional calcium supplements. The doctor recommended them for her growing bones." She stirred the mixture vigorously, causing the powder to disappear into the creamy white liquid. Catherine had been present during all of Isabella's medical consultations and had never heard any mention of calcium supplements. Moreover, the Duchess was meticulous about communicating any changes to Isabella's routine, and no such instruction had been given. Catherine's suspicions deepened, but she maintained her composed exterior. "I see. I don't recall the Duchess mentioning this to me. Perhaps you could show me the doctor's instructions so I can update Isabella's care records accordingly." Eleanor's hands stilled for a moment. I believe I left the paperwork in my quarters." "I'll be sure to bring it to you later today." She quickly finished preparing the milk and moved toward the door. "I should get this to Isabella before her snack time ends." Catherine watched Eleanor hurry away, noting the woman's obvious discomfort and evasive answers. Something was definitely wrong, and Catherine knew she needed to investigate further. The safety and well-being of Princess Isabella was her primary responsibility, and she would not allow any harm to come to the child under her watch. The remainder of the morning passed uneventfully, but Catherine's mind was occupied with troubling thoughts. She had worked with Eleanor for years, and had always found her to be reliable and trustworthy. The woman's behavior today was completely out of character, and Catherine couldn't help but wonder what might have caused such a dramatic change. As lunchtime approached, Catherine made her way to the Duchess's private study. Lady Margaret was reviewing correspondence when Catherine knocked softly on the door. The Duchess looked up with a smile, gesturing for Catherine to enter. "Your Grace, I hope I'm not interrupting, but I wanted to inquire about the new supplements that Eleanor mentioned for Princess Isabella. I'd like to ensure our records are properly updated." Lady Margaret's brow furrowed in confusion. "Supplements? I'm afraid I don't know what you're referring to, Catherine. Isabella isn't taking any supplements. Her last medical examination showed her to be in perfect health." Catherine felt her heart sink. Her worst fears were being confirmed. "Eleanor mentioned that you had requested calcium supplements based on the doctor's recommendations." "That's absolutely incorrect," Lady Margaret said, her voice taking on a sharp edge. "I would never authorize any medication or supplements without consulting with you first. You know how careful we are about Isabella's care." The two women stared at each other for a moment, the implications of this revelation hanging heavy in the air. Catherine knew that immediate action was required, but she also understood the need to proceed carefully. If Eleanor was indeed giving Isabella unauthorized substances, they needed to determine what those substances were and why Eleanor was administering them. "What do you suggest we do, Your Grace?" Catherine asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil she felt inside. Lady Margaret stood and walked to the window, her mind clearly racing. "We need to investigate this immediately, but we must be discreet. If Eleanor is acting with malicious intent, we don't want to alert her that we're suspicious. Can you arrange to have the substances tested without Eleanor's knowledge?" Catherine nodded. "I have contacts who can help us. In the meantime, should we prevent Eleanor from giving Isabella anything else?" "Yes, but we need to be subtle about it. Perhaps you could arrange for Isabella's schedule to be modified so that she takes her snacks and drinks in different locations, making it more difficult for Eleanor to prepare them privately." As the afternoon wore on, Catherine implemented the plan they had discussed. She arranged for Isabella to take her afternoon snack in the main kitchen with the cook, citing a special lesson about food preparation. She also ensured that one of the other staff members was always present when Eleanor was with Isabella, though she presented this as routine security protocol rather than surveillance. Eleanor seemed to grow more agitated as the day progressed, clearly uncomfortable with the additional oversight. Catherine observed her carefully, noting the woman's nervous habits and the way she kept checking the time. It was as if Eleanor was waiting for something or someone. As evening approached, Catherine prepared for what she knew would be a sleepless night. She had arranged for discreet surveillance of Eleanor's quarters and had contacted a trusted laboratory to analyze samples of anything Eleanor might be giving to Isabella. The wheels were now in motion, and Catherine hoped they would have answers soon. The first day of investigation was drawing to a close, but Catherine knew this was just the beginning. Whatever Eleanor was doing, and whatever her motives might be, Catherine was determined to uncover the truth and protect Princess Isabella from any potential harm. The safety of the royal family was her sacred trust, and she would not fail in that responsibility. The following morning brought an unseasonably cold wind that rattled the windows of Rosewood Manor. Catherine had barely slept, her mind churning with possibilities and fears about Eleanor's strange behavior. She rose before dawn to begin what she knew would be a crucial day in uncovering the truth about the mysterious supplements Eleanor had been giving to Princess Isabella. Catherine's first task was to meet with Dr. Harrison Wells, a discreet laboratory specialist she had contacted the previous evening. Dr. Wells had agreed to analyze any samples Catherine could provide, understanding the sensitive nature of the situation. Catherine had managed to obtain a small amount of the white powder Eleanor had been mixing into Isabella's milk, carefully collected from the kitchen surfaces after Eleanor had prepared the previous day's snack. The laboratory was located in a modest building on the outskirts of the nearby town of Millbrook. Catherine arrived just as Dr. Wells was unlocking the front door, his gray hair tousled by the morning breeze. He was a man in his 60s, with kind eyes and a reputation for discretion that had made him valuable to several prominent families over the years. "Lady Catherine," Dr. Wells greeted her warmly. "I must say, your call yesterday evening has kept me awake most of the night. The implications of what you've described are quite serious." Catherine handed him a small sealed envelope containing the powder sample. "Doctor, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is that we handle this matter with absolute confidentiality. The reputation of the family and, more importantly, the safety of a young child hangs in the balance." Dr. Kapitov. Wells examined the envelope carefully. "I understand completely. I'll begin the analysis immediately and should have preliminary results within a few hours. If this substance is what I suspect it might be, we'll need to involve the authorities very quickly." As Catherine made her way back to Rosewood Manor, her mind was already working on the next phase of her investigation. She needed to understand Eleanor's motivations and determine whether the nanny was acting alone or if there were others involved. The thought that someone might be deliberately harming Princess Isabella filled Catherine with a cold fury that she struggled to contain. Upon returning to the manor, Catherine found the household in its usual state of organized activity. The staff went about their morning duties with practiced efficiency, unaware of the crisis that was unfolding in their midst. Catherine made her way to the security office, where she met with James Morrison, the head of the manor's discreet security team. James was a former military officer who had been with the family for 5 years. His calm demeanor and sharp analytical mind had made him an invaluable asset, and Catherine knew she could trust him with this sensitive matter. She briefed him on the situation with Eleanor, watching as his expression grew increasingly grave. "We need to establish a timeline," James said, pulling out a notebook. "When did you first notice Eleanor's unusual behavior? Has Princess Isabella shown any signs of illness or changes in her behavior that might indicate she's been receiving unauthorized medication?" Catherine thought back over the previous weeks. "Now that you mention it, Isabella has seemed more lethargic lately. The Duchess mentioned it to me several times, but we attributed it to a growth spurt. She's also been having trouble sleeping, which is unusual for her." James made notes as Catherine spoke. "We need to review the security footage from the nursery wing. If Eleanor has been administering these substances regularly, there should be evidence of her unusual behavior patterns." The two of them spent the next hour reviewing digital recordings from the security cameras positioned throughout the manor. The footage revealed a disturbing pattern. Eleanor had been visiting Isabella's quarters at odd hours, often late at night when the rest of the household was asleep. She appeared to be checking on the child more frequently than necessary, and on several occasions, she could be seen preparing drinks or snacks outside of the normal meal times. "Look at this," James pointed to a sequence from 3 nights earlier. The timestamp showed 2:30 a.m., and Eleanor could be seen entering Isabella's room carrying a small glass. She remained in the room for nearly 10 minutes before leaving. Catherine felt her heart racing as she watched the footage. Isabella is normally a sound sleeper. There's no reason Eleanor should need to wake her in the middle of the night for anything. As they continued reviewing the recordings, a pattern emerged that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. Eleanor's nighttime visits had been occurring for at least 2 weeks, always following the same routine. She would prepare something in the small kitchen, take it to Isabella's room, and remain there for several minutes before leaving. James paused the recording and turned to Catherine. "We need to consider the possibility that Eleanor is being coerced or blackmailed into doing this. Her behavior suggests someone who is acting against her natural inclinations." Catherine had been thinking the same thing. Eleanor had always shown genuine affection for Isabella, and her current actions seemed completely contrary to her character. What kind of leverage could someone have over her? Financial troubles, threats to family members, compromising information. The possibilities are numerous. We need to investigate Eleanor's personal circumstances without alerting her to our suspicions. While James continued analyzing the security footage, Catherine decided to conduct some discreet inquiries about Eleanor's recent behavior with other staff members. She began with Mrs. Patricia Collins, the head housekeeper, who had worked closely with Eleanor for several years. "Patricia, have you noticed anything unusual about Eleanor lately?" Catherine asked during their routine morning meeting. Mrs. Collins paused in her review of the housekeeping schedule. "Now that you mention it, she has seemed quite distracted. Last week I found her crying in the linen closet, but when I asked what was wrong, she claimed it was just allergies. She's also been receiving more telephone calls than usual. and she always steps away to take them privately. Catherine made mental notes of these observations. Do you know anything about her family situation? Has she mentioned any problems at home? She did mention that her elderly mother has been ill, and I know she's been worried about medical expenses. Eleanor's always been proud, though. The type to suffer in silence rather than ask for help. This information provided Catherine with a possible motive. If Eleanor was facing financial difficulties due to her mother's medical bills, she might be vulnerable to someone offering money in exchange for harming Isabella. The thought made Catherine's stomach turn, but she knew she needed to consider all possibilities. Catherine's contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of a message from Dr. Willutha Wells. The preliminary analysis was complete, and he needed to speak with her immediately. Catherine made her way back to the laboratory, her anxiety growing with each passing mile. Wells met her at the door, his expression grim. Catherine, I'm afraid the news is worse than we feared. The substance you brought me is a mild sedative, specifically designed to be undetectable when mixed with milk or other beverages. It's not immediately dangerous, but prolonged use could cause serious health problems, particularly in a child. Catherine felt the world spinning around her. Someone was deliberately drugging Princess Isabella with sedatives, and Eleanor was the one administering them. Doctor, how long would someone need to be taking this before it caused permanent damage? That depends on the dosage and the child's body weight, but I would estimate that prolonged use over several weeks could cause developmental issues, memory problems, and damage to the nervous system. Time is of the essence here. Wells assured him that the appropriate authorities would be contacted immediately. As she drove back to Rosewood Manor, her mind was focused on one priority: protecting Princess Isabella and ensuring that whoever was behind this plot was brought to justice. Upon her return, Catherine went directly to the Duchess's study. Lady Margaret listened in horror as Catherine reported the laboratory findings, her face growing pale as the implications became clear. Someone has been poisoning my daughter, Lady Margaret whispered, her voice barely audible. How could this happen under our own roof? Catherine had been dreading this conversation, but she knew the Duchess deserved to know the truth. Your Grace, we believe Eleanor is being coerced into doing this. The evidence suggests she's not acting voluntarily. Lady Margaret's expression hardened. Coerced or not, she has been putting my child's life at risk. We need to involve the police immediately. I agree, but we need to be strategic about how we proceed. If we move too quickly, we might lose the opportunity to identify whoever is controlling Eleanor. We need to catch them all. The Duchess considered this for a moment. What do you propose? Catherine had been formulating a plan during her drive back from the laboratory. We continue monitoring Eleanor while building our case. We gather more evidence about who might be blackmailing her and what they ultimately hope to achieve. In the meantime, we ensure that Isabella is completely safe by having someone else prepare all of her food and drinks. Lady Margaret nodded slowly. Very well, but I want this resolved quickly. Every moment that Isabella remains in potential danger is unacceptable. As the second day of investigation drew to a close, Catherine felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever before. They had confirmed their worst fears about Eleanor's actions, but they were still no closer to understanding who was behind the plot or what their ultimate goals might be. The investigation was far from over, and Catherine knew that the most dangerous phase was yet to come. The third day of investigation began with an unexpected development that would change the entire trajectory of Catherine's inquiry. At precisely 6:30 a.m., she received an urgent call from James Morrison, whose overnight surveillance had uncovered something significant. Eleanor had left her quarters at 3 a.m. and had not returned. Catherine dressed quickly and made her way to the security office, where James was reviewing footage from the exterior cameras. The recording showed Eleanor leaving through a side entrance of the manor, carrying a small suitcase and moving with obvious urgency. She had walked to the main road, where a black sedan was waiting for her. Did you get a clear view of the vehicle or its occupants? Catherine asked, studying the grainy footage. James shook his head. The license plate is partially obscured, and the driver remained in the car. However, I was able to capture this. He handed Catherine a printed screenshot showing Eleanor speaking through the passenger window of the sedan. Though the image quality was poor, it was clear that she appeared distressed. Catherine felt a chill as she realized the implications of Eleanor's disappearance. If she's fled, it means someone warned her that we were investigating. We have a leak in our security. The possibility that someone else within the manor was involved in the plot against Princess Isabella was deeply troubling. Catherine had trusted her staff implicitly, and the thought that one of them might be working against the family was almost too much to bear. James had been thinking along the same lines. We need to review who had access to information about our investigation. The circle of people who knew about our suspicions regarding Eleanor was very small. Catherine quickly ran through the list in her mind. Herself, James, the Duchess, and Dr. Wells. She was certain that Dr. Wells could be trusted, and she had complete faith in James's loyalty. That left the possibility that someone had overheard their conversations, or that the Duchess had inadvertently shared the information with someone else. "We need to speak with Her Grace immediately," Catherine said, her voice tight with concern. They found the Duchess in the breakfast room, where she was attempting to maintain a normal routine despite the crisis. Princess Isabella was seated across from her, chattering happily about her plans for the day. The sight of the child, healthy and unaware of the danger she had been in, strengthened Catherine's resolve to see this investigation through to its conclusion. Catherine waited until Isabella had finished her breakfast and gone to the library with her tutor before approaching the Duchess. When she explained Eleanor's disappearance, Lady Margaret's face went through a range of emotions: shock, anger, and finally a cold determination. "This confirms that we're dealing with something much larger than a simple case of employee misconduct," Lady Margaret said quietly. "Someone has been orchestrating this entire situation, and they have resources and connections that allowed them to monitor our investigation." Catherine nodded grimly. "We need to consider the possibility that this plot extends beyond just drugging Isabella. Eleanor's disappearance suggests that we may have uncovered only the tip of the iceberg." James cleared his throat. "With your permission, Your Grace, I'd like to contact Detective Inspector Sarah Chen. She specializes in cases involving threats to prominent families, and she has the resources to conduct a proper criminal investigation." Lady Margaret considered this for a moment. "Yes, but we must be extremely careful about who we trust going forward. If there's a security breach within our own household, we can't afford to take any chances with Isabella's safety." While James made the call to Detective Inspector Chen, Catherine began the difficult task of reviewing every staff member's recent behavior and circumstances. She started with the employees who had been present during her conversations about the investigation, looking for any signs that someone might have been eavesdropping or acting unusually. The head cook, Mrs. Sarah Williams, had been with the family for over 15 years, and had always been completely reliable. Catherine reviewed her recent work patterns and found nothing suspicious. The head groundskeeper, Thomas Reed, was similarly above suspicion. His loyalty to the family was unquestioned, and he had no access to the areas where Catherine and James had conducted their discussions. As Catherine continued her review, she began to focus on the newer staff members, those who had been hired within the past 2 years. One name stood out: Marcus Whitfield, the assistant security officer who had been hired 18 months earlier. Marcus had impressive credentials and had passed all background checks, but Catherine realized that he would have had access to the security office where she and James had reviewed the footage. Catherine shared her suspicions with James when he returned from his phone call. Detective Inspector Chen was on her way to the manor and would arrive within the hour, bringing with her a team of specialists trained in dealing with complex criminal conspiracies. "Marcus has been working the night shift this week," James said, checking the duty roster. "He would have been in the security office when Eleanor left the manor. If he was involved in this plot, he could have warned his accomplices that Eleanor's cover was blown." They decided to review Marcus's employment file more carefully. On the surface, everything appeared legitimate. His previous employers had given positive references, his background check had been clean, and his work performance had been satisfactory. However, Catherine noticed something troubling. 2 of his previous employers had gone out of business within months of his departure. "This could be a coincidence," James said, "but it's worth investigating further." Detective Inspector Chen arrived at Rosewood Manor at exactly 10:30 a.m., accompanied by 2 plainclothes officers and a technical specialist. She was a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately impressed Catherine. After being briefed on the situation, she took charge of the investigation with professional efficiency. "The first priority is securing Princess Isabella's safety," Detective Inspector Chen stated. "I want her under constant protection by officers I personally trust. Second, we need to determine the scope of this conspiracy and identify all participants. Third, we need to understand what the ultimate goal was. Was this simply about harming the child, or was there a larger objective?" The detectives' team immediately began processing the evidence Catherine and James had gathered. They took samples of the remaining powder Eleanor had been using, photographed all relevant security footage, and began comprehensive background checks on every staff member at the manor. Detective Inspector Chen personally interviewed the Duchess, taking detailed notes about any unusual incidents or communications the family had received in recent months. During this conversation, an important detail emerged that had previously been overlooked. "About 3 weeks ago, we received a letter from someone claiming to represent a charitable organization," Lady Margaret recalled. "They were requesting a substantial donation and mentioned that they had detailed information about our family's daily routines. I found it rather presumptuous and declined to respond." Detective Inspector Chen immediately recognized the significance of this information. "Do you still have this letter?" Lady Margaret retrieved the letter from her correspondence file. It was written on professional letterhead for something called the Children's Welfare Foundation, but the detective's trained eye immediately spotted several red flags. The letterhead looked authentic, but the language was subtly threatening, and the level of detail about the family's routines was far beyond what any legitimate charity would possess. "This appears to be an extortion attempt," Detective Inspector Chen concluded. "The drugging of Princess Isabella may have been intended to make her ill enough to require medical attention, which would then provide the perpetrators with leverage for their demands." Catherine felt pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place. They were planning to make Isabella sick and then offer to help the family in exchange for money or some other consideration. The investigation took on new urgency as the team realized they were dealing with a sophisticated extortion scheme rather than simple malicious intent. Detective Inspector Chen coordinated with national law enforcement agencies to trace the origins of the fraudulent charity and identify the people behind it. Meanwhile, Catherine worked with the detective's technical specialist to analyze all communications that had come into the manor in recent weeks. They discovered several suspicious phone calls to Eleanor's personal line, all traced to untraceable prepaid phones. The pattern of these calls corresponded exactly with Eleanor's increasingly erratic behavior. As the third day of investigation concluded, the scope of the conspiracy was becoming clearer. Eleanor had been coerced into participating in an elaborate extortion scheme designed to target the royal family. Her disappearance suggested that the perpetrators were prepared to abandon their plan when they realized they had been discovered, but Catherine knew they weren't safe yet. "These people have invested significant time and resources in this operation," Detective Inspector Chen warned. "They may try again, possibly with a different approach. We need to remain vigilant and continue building our case until we can arrest everyone involved." Catherine looked out at the grounds of Rosewood Manor, where Princess Isabella was playing under the watchful eyes of armed police officers disguised as gardeners. The child's laughter carried on the afternoon breeze, a reminder of what they were fighting to protect. The investigation was far from over, but Catherine was determined to see it through to the end. The fourth day brought a breakthrough that would expose the full extent of the conspiracy against the royal family. Detective Inspector Chen had worked through the night with her team, coordinating with international law enforcement agencies to track down the criminal organization behind the Children's Welfare Foundation. What they discovered was far more extensive than anyone had initially imagined. Catherine was summoned to an emergency meeting at 7 a.m., where Detective Inspector Chen presented her findings. The conference room at the manor had been converted into a temporary command center, with charts, photographs, and computer screens displaying the evidence they had gathered. "We've identified the criminal organization responsible for this operation," Detective Inspector Chen began, pointing to a complex organizational chart on the wall. "They call themselves the Sterling Group, and they specialize in sophisticated extortion schemes targeting wealthy families across Europe." "How long have they been operating?" "At least 5 years, possibly longer. They've perfected a system of infiltrating households through seemingly legitimate employment agencies, placing their operatives in positions where they can gather intelligence and carry out their schemes." The detective explained that Marcus Whitfield, the assistant security officer, was indeed a Sterling Group operative. His role had been to monitor the family's security measures and provide intelligence about their daily routines. Eleanor's recruitment had been a separate operation, exploiting her financial vulnerabilities to coerce her participation. Eleanor's mother doesn't actually exist, Detective Inspector Chen revealed. The medical bills she was supposedly struggling with were fabricated. The Sterling Group created an elaborate fiction to make her believe she was helping to pay for her mother's treatment. Catherine felt a wave of sympathy for Eleanor, realizing that the woman had been as much a victim as Princess Isabella. Where is Eleanor now? Is she safe? We believe she's being held by the Sterling Group, possibly to prevent her from talking to authorities. We have teams searching for her. But these people are professionals. They know how to disappear. The scope of the Sterling Group's operation was staggering. They had attempted similar schemes against at least a dozen prominent families, using various methods to create leverage for extortion demands. In some cases, they had succeeded in obtaining substantial payments before disappearing. Detective Inspector Chen continued her briefing. The plan for your family was particularly sophisticated. They intended to make Princess Isabella chronically ill through the administration of sedatives, then approach you claiming to have information about a cure or treatment in exchange for a substantial payment. If that failed, they would have escalated to more direct threats. Catherine shuddered at the implications. How close did they come to success? Very close. If you hadn't noticed Eleanor's suspicious behavior when you did, Isabella could have suffered permanent harm. The sedatives were building up in her system, and another week of treatment could have caused serious neurological damage. The detectives team had been working with medical experts to assess the full extent of the threat to Princess Isabella. Dr. Wells had provided detailed analysis of the substances Eleanor had been administering, confirming that they were part of a carefully designed regimen intended to produce specific symptoms that would mimic a rare medical condition. The Sterling Group has a medical consultant who designs these treatment protocols, Detective Inspector Chen explained. Amanda Foster is a former physician who lost her license due to unethical experimentation. She's been working with the organization to develop methods of inducing illness that appear natural. As the briefing continued, Catherine learned about the international scope of the investigation. Law enforcement agencies in 6 countries were coordinating efforts to dismantle the Sterling Group's network. Several arrests had already been made in connection with other operations, but the core leadership remained elusive. James Morrison had been working with the detectives' technical team to analyze all communications equipment at the manor. They had discovered sophisticated surveillance devices that Marcus Whitfield had installed in key locations throughout the building. These devices had allowed the Sterling Group to monitor the family's conversations and activities in real time. The level of surveillance was unprecedented, James reported. They knew everything: Isabella's schedule, the family's travel plans, even private conversations between staff members. Marcus had access to our entire security system. Catherine realized that the Sterling Group's intelligence gathering had been even more extensive than they had initially suspected. How long were these devices in place? Based on the technology used, we estimate at least 6 months, Detective Inspector Chen replied. They've been planning this operation for a very long time. The discovery of the surveillance devices explained how the Sterling Group had been able to monitor Catherine's investigation so closely. They had known about her suspicions regarding Eleanor almost immediately and had been prepared to abort the operation when necessary. Detective Inspector Chen outlined the next phase of the investigation. We need to use this intelligence to our advantage. The Sterling Group believes they've successfully escaped, but we know more about their operation than they realize. We're going to set a trap. The plan was complex but elegant in its simplicity. The police would leak false information suggesting that Princess Isabella had suffered a medical emergency and was being treated at a private hospital. They hoped this would draw the Sterling Group out of hiding, either to claim credit for their success or to attempt to exploit the situation further. We'll need the family's cooperation to make this convincing, Detective Inspector Chen said, looking at Catherine. Princess Isabella will need to be relocated to a secure location while we maintain the fiction that she's hospitalized. Catherine understood the necessity of the plan, but she was concerned about the psychological impact on Isabella. The child has been through enough already. We need to ensure that this doesn't traumatize her further. Lady Margaret, who had been listening to the briefing in silence, finally spoke. Whatever is necessary to protect my daughter and prevent these people from harming other families, will do it. But I want guarantees about Isabella's safety." Detective Inspector Chen assured the Duchess that Isabella would be under constant protection by an elite security team. A safe house had been prepared at an undisclosed location, complete with tutors and activities to keep the child occupied during what they hoped would be a brief operation. As the fourth day progressed, the elaborate deception was put into motion. False medical reports were prepared and strategically leaked to sources the Sterling Group was known to monitor. The story of Princess Isabella's sudden illness spread through carefully controlled channels, designed to reach the criminal organization while maintaining secrecy from the general public. Meanwhile, Catherine coordinated the logistics of moving the real Princess Isabella to safety. The child was told that she was going on a special adventure, staying in a beautiful country house where she could explore nature and continue her studies in a more relaxed environment. "Will Eleanor be coming with us?" Isabella asked innocently as Catherine helped her pack a small bag. Catherine's heart ached as she realized the child had grown fond of her former nanny, unaware of the danger Eleanor had posed. "Eleanor is taking some time away, sweetheart, but you'll have other wonderful people to take care of you." As evening approached, Catherine watched from a secure location as Isabella was safely transported to the safe house. The child seemed excited about her adventure, blissfully unaware of the complex criminal conspiracy that had threatened her life. Detective Inspector Chen's team maintained their surveillance of known Sterling Group communication channels, waiting for any indication that their deception had been successful. The trap had been set, and now they could only wait to see if the criminals would take the bait. Catherine spent the night at the manor, maintaining the illusion that everything was normal while coordinating with the police operation. She knew that the next day would likely bring the conclusion to this terrifying ordeal, one way or another. The safety of Princess Isabella depended on their success, and Catherine was determined to see the Sterling Group brought to justice for their crimes against the innocent child and her family. Part 5. The final day of the investigation dawned with an electric tension that seemed to permeate every corner of Rosewood Manor. Catherine had barely slept, her mind racing with anticipation and worry about the elaborate trap Detective Inspector Chen had set for the Sterling Group. The false reports of Princess Isabella's hospitalization had been circulating for 24 hours, and intelligence indicated that the criminal organization was beginning to take notice. At 6 a.m., Catherine received word that Eleanor Hartwell had been found. A police raid on a warehouse in the industrial district of Millbrook had uncovered a temporary safe house where the Sterling Group had been holding her. Eleanor was physically unharmed but emotionally traumatized by her ordeal. Finally understanding the full extent of how she had been manipulated, Detective Inspector Chen brought Eleanor to a secure location near the manor for debriefing. Catherine was present for the interview, hoping to gain closure and understanding about the events that had nearly harmed Princess Isabella. Eleanor's story was heartbreaking in its simplicity and the calculated cruelty of her manipulation. "They contacted me 6 months ago," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A woman called claiming to be from a medical finance company, saying they could help with my mother's treatment costs. I was so desperate, the bills were overwhelming, and I didn't know where to turn." Eleanor explained how the Sterling Group had created an elaborate fiction around her mother's illness, complete with fake medical reports and staged phone calls from supposed doctors. They had convinced her that her mother was receiving life-saving treatment that required ongoing payments and that the family's insurance had been exhausted. "They told me all I had to do was give Isabella some vitamins," Eleanor continued, tears streaming down her face. "They said it was a supplement that would help her concentrate better on her studies. I never knew I was hurting her. I thought I was helping both Isabella and my mother." Catherine felt a profound sadness for Eleanor, realizing how expertly the criminals had exploited the woman's love for her family and her dedication to Princess Isabella. The Sterling Group had turned Eleanor's best qualities, her compassion and loyalty, against her, making her an unwitting instrument in their scheme. "When did you begin to suspect something was wrong?" Detective Inspector Chen asked gently. Eleanor wiped her eyes with a tissue. "Last week, when Lady Catherine started asking questions about the supplements. I tried to contact the people who had been helping me, but their phone numbers were disconnected. That's when I realized something terrible was happening." The interview revealed additional details about the Sterling Group's operation. Eleanor had been in contact with at least 3 different operatives, each playing a specific role in maintaining the deception. She had never met any of them in person, and all communications had been carefully controlled to prevent her from discovering the truth. As Eleanor's debriefing continued, Detective Inspector Chen received updates from her surveillance teams. The Sterling Group had taken the bait. Their communications had been intercepted, discussing plans to exploit Princess Isabella's supposed hospitalization. They were planning to approach the family with an offer of experimental treatment, demanding a substantial payment for access to their supposed medical expertise. "They're moving faster than we expected," Detective Inspector Chen reported to Catherine. "Our intelligence suggests they're planning to make contact with the family later today. We need to be ready." Catherine reviewed the final preparations for their operation. Actors had been hired to play medical staff at the fake hospital where Princess Isabella was supposedly being treated. The facility had been equipped with sophisticated recording equipment to capture any interactions with the Sterling Group operatives. Police teams were positioned at strategic locations, ready to move in for arrests once they had sufficient evidence. The first contact came at 2:30 p.m. in the form of a phone call to the Duchess's private line. Lady Margaret, who had been thoroughly briefed on her role in the operation, answered with the appropriate level of distressed urgency that would be expected from a mother whose child was seriously ill. The caller introduced himself as Dr. Prada, Richard Sterling, claiming to represent a specialized medical research foundation that had experience treating the rare condition supposedly affecting Princess Isabella. His manner was smooth and professional, designed to inspire confidence while exploiting the family's desperation. "Your Grace, I understand that traditional treatments have been unsuccessful thus far," the caller said, his voice oozing false sympathy. "Our foundation has had remarkable success with cases similar to your daughter's, but our treatment protocols are not widely available through conventional medical channels." Lady Margaret played her role perfectly, expressing both hope and skepticism in equal measure. "What kind of treatment are you referring to?" "Isabella's doctors haven't been able to identify the exact cause of her condition. Our research has identified a rare neurological condition that affects children of Isabella's age group. The symptoms often mimic other disorders, which is why conventional medicine struggles to provide effective treatment. However, our specialized approach has shown remarkable results." Detective Inspector Chen and her team monitored the call from their command center, recording every word while tracing the origin of the transmission. The technology being used by the Sterling Group was sophisticated, but not sophisticated enough to evade law enforcement surveillance. Dr. Protected It. Sterling continued his pitch, gradually building toward the financial demands that were the true purpose of his call. "The treatment protocol involves a series of specialized medications and therapies that must be administered under carefully controlled conditions. Unfortunately, the cost of these treatments is substantial, as they're not covered by traditional insurance plans." "How substantial?" Lady Margaret asked, maintaining the desperate edge in her voice that would encourage the criminals to reveal their full intentions. "The complete treatment program costs approximately £2 million, but I want to assure you that the results justify this investment. We've had a 100% success rate with cases similar to Isabella's." This was the moment Detective Inspector Chen had been waiting for. The Sterling Group had explicitly demanded money in exchange for medical treatment, providing clear evidence of their extortion scheme. Police teams were already moving into position around the locations where the criminals were believed to be operating. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes as Dr. Sterling provided detailed instructions for arranging the payment and scheduling Isabella's treatment. He insisted that time was of the essence, claiming that delays could result in permanent damage to the child's neurological development. Lady Margaret agreed to the terms, arranging to meet with Sterling Group representatives the following morning to finalize the arrangements. As soon as the call ended, Detective Inspector Chen's teams moved into action, coordinating simultaneous raids on multiple locations where Sterling Group operatives were believed to be hiding. The arrests were swift and coordinated. Marcus Whitfield was taken into custody at a hotel in the neighboring city, along with 2 other operatives who had been monitoring police communications. Amanda Foster, the group's medical consultant, was arrested at her apartment, where police found extensive files documenting the organization's various schemes. The man calling himself Dr. Richard Sterling proved to be Thomas Crawford, a convicted fraudster with a history of targeting wealthy families. His arrest at a rented office space revealed the sophisticated command center the Sterling Group had established to coordinate their operation against the royal family. As news of the arrests reached Catherine, she felt an overwhelming sense of relief mixed with exhaustion. The threat to Princess Isabella had been eliminated, and the criminals responsible were in custody. Eleanor would need time to recover from her ordeal, but she would not face prosecution given her status as a victim of the scheme. Detective Inspector Chen provided Catherine with a final briefing as the investigation concluded. We've identified connections to at least 15 other criminal operations across Europe. This investigation has provided law enforcement with valuable intelligence that will help protect other potential victims. Catherine made arrangements for Princess Isabella's return to Rosewood Manor, knowing that the child would need time to readjust after her adventure at the safe house. The family's security protocols would be reviewed and strengthened, but Catherine was confident that the immediate danger had passed. As the sun set over Rosewood Manor on the final day of the investigation, Catherine stood in the same spot where she had first sensed that something was wrong with Eleanor's behavior. The events of the past week had tested everyone involved, but they had ultimately prevented a terrible crime against an innocent child. Princess Isabella returned home that evening, full of stories about her adventure and excited to resume her normal routine. She asked about Eleanor, and Catherine gently explained that the nanny had needed to take some time away, but that she hoped Eleanor would recover and find happiness. The Sterling Group's elaborate conspiracy had been exposed and defeated through the combined efforts of dedicated professionals who refused to allow harm to come to those under their protection. Catherine knew that vigilance would always be required to protect the family she served, but she also knew that they were stronger and more prepared for whatever challenges the future might bring. As Catherine locked the manor's doors that night, she reflected on the lessons learned from this ordeal. Trust was precious and easily exploited, but with careful attention and swift action, even the most sophisticated criminal schemes could be defeated. Princess Isabella was safe, Eleanor would receive the help she needed to recover, and justice had been served. The fictional story of Rosewood Manor's crisis had reached its conclusion, but Catherine knew that her real work, protecting the family she served with unwavering dedication, would continue for many years to come. The end. This is a work of complete fiction. All characters, places, and events are imaginary and created for entertainment purposes only.